Imagine a civilization so advanced, their secrets could reshape the very fabric of reality, yet so dangerous, their knowledge was buried beneath the waves forever. This is the legacy of Atlantis, a realm where the line between myth and history blurs into something far more unsettling. Among their most guarded mysteries were the entity creation rituals, whispered to be the ultimate expression of power. These weren't just ceremonies, they were acts of defiance against the natural order, a way to breathe life into the unimaginable. But such power never comes without a price, and the cost, whether in flesh, spirit, or fate, was said to be catastrophic. What if I told you fragments of these rituals survived, scattered across ancient texts, hidden in the coded symbols of lost temples, or passed down through generations of secret keepers? The echoes of Atlantis's forbidden art still linger. Think about that for a moment. The ability to sculpt life from nothingness, to summon beings beyond human comprehension. These weren't just stories, they were protocols meticulously designed and terrifyingly effective. Yet every account warns of the same thing. Those who dared to wield this knowledge often vanished without a trace, as if the very forces they summoned turned against them. Today, we're pulling back the veil on one of history's most enigmatic chapters. This isn't just about uncovering lost techniques, it's about understanding why some doors were meant to stay sealed. From the first whispered incantations to the chilling aftermath of these rituals, we'll trace the path of a civilization that reached too far and the warnings they left behind. So settle in. What you're about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about the past and perhaps make you wonder what else might still be waiting, hidden in the shadows of history. Atlantis wasn't just another lost city. It was a civilization operating on a level we still struggle to comprehend. Ancient texts describe towers that harnessed energy from the earth, machines that defied the laws of physics, and most chilling of all, rituals that could manipulate the boundaries of life itself. According to Plato, the Atlanteans were masters of both science and the esoteric, blending them into something beyond mere technology. Their downfall wasn't just a catastrophe, it was a warning. Some say their experiments with creation grew too bold, that the entities they summoned or forged became impossible to control. Others believe their knowledge attracted forces beyond human understanding, forces that demanded a price too steep to pay. Historical accounts outside Plato's writings add eerie details. The Egyptian priest Manetho spoke of a great deluge wiping away a people who spoke to gods as equals. Fragments from the Maya Dresden Codex reference a land swallowed by water after the sky-born ones walked among men. Even in Tibet, certain secret monastic texts describe an island where adepts could shape thought into flesh until something went horribly wrong. The common thread, a civilization that reached too high, too fast, without considering the consequences of wielding power meant for older, wiser hands. What makes these legends so unsettling is the precision of the descriptions. This wasn't just magic, it was methodology. The Atlanteans allegedly used geometric harmonics to amplify their rituals, aligning sacred sites with celestial patterns to focus energy. Some researchers argue their famed orichalcum metal wasn't just a decorative alloy, but a conductor for forces we'd now call quantum or dimensional. And then there are the entity creation texts, formulas so precise they read like engineering schematics, but for living things. Step 1. Construct a vessel of purified crystals. Step 2. Chant in a language that vibrates at frequencies matching the target entity's signature. Step 3. The part most records omit because whoever tried it never survived to document what happened next. The chilling truth is, we may never know the full extent of what Atlantis accomplished or what ended them, but the surviving fragments suggest a terrifying possibility. They didn't just disappear. They might have been erased, whether by their own creations, by forces they awakened, or by some greater design we can't yet fathom. Their legacy is a puzzle wrapped in riddles, sealed with a warning. And that warning echoes through every myth, every corrupted manuscript, every half-remembered legend of a world that dared to play with fire on a cosmic scale. The most dangerous secrets of Atlantis weren't etched into stone or displayed in their grand temples. They were locked away in scrolls so volatile, even the priests hesitated to handle them. These weren't just records, they were blueprints for bending reality itself, written in a language that seemed to pulse with unseen energy. According to fragmented accounts from Egypt, Crete, and even the remote corners of the Andes, the Atlanteans guarded these texts with a paranoia bordering on reverence. Some say the scrolls were penned in a script that shifted before the eyes, as if the words themselves were alive. Others claim the ink was laced with ground crystals tuned to specific frequencies, turning each page into a resonant chamber for forces beyond human control. The few surviving references describe these texts as the breath of the gods given form, instructions so precise they could allegedly sculpt consciousness from raw energy. One passage preserved in a cryptic Babylonian tablet speaks of a vessel of hollow light that, when activated by the correct sequence of tones, would draw forth a watcher from the void. But here's where the records turn sinister. Every culture that inherited fragments of this knowledge, whether the Mesopotamians, the Druids, or the Vedic seers, reported the same pattern. Those who attempted to use the rituals faced grotesque consequences. Manuscripts from the Library of Alexandria before its burning told of a scholar who decoded a single Atlantean formula. Within days, his entire research team vanished, leaving behind only shadows burned into the walls of their workshop. Why were these texts so fiercely suppressed? The answer lies in their design. Unlike modern occult manuscripts, which often rely on vague symbolism, the Atlantean scrolls reportedly functioned like technical manuals. A passage from the Lost Emerald tablets describes exact geometric angles for arranging ritual chambers, precise harmonic intervals for chanting, even the exact mineral composition required for the vessel that would house the summoned entity. This wasn't mysticism, it was applied science, a recipe for opening doors that nature never intended to be opened. Small wonder then that the few rulers who inherited these scraps, from Pharaoh Akhenaten to Emperor Ashoka, ordered them entombed or drowned in sacred lakes. The most chilling detail: some texts may still exist. Medieval Arab alchemists wrote of a black library beneath the ruins of Carthage, where Punic priests stored Atlantean relics in lead-lined chests. Spanish conquistadors in Peru documented Inca priests guarding metal pages that hummed in the dark, said to be gifts from a drowned kingdom. Even today, whispers persist among certain secret societies of a master text, the Codex Umbra, hidden somewhere in the Himalayas, waiting for a world ready or foolish enough to reclaim it. One thing unites all these legends: a bone-deep certainty that these words weren't merely forbidden. They were alive, and they remembered what happened to the last civilization that dared to speak them aloud. The Atlanteans didn't forge entities on a whim. Every ritual had purpose. Every summoning served a vision far grander than mere domination. To understand why, we must step into their world, where the boundaries between science, spirituality, and survival blurred into something extraordinary. Their civilization thrived on pushing limits, but entity creation wasn't just about power. It was about solving problems that even their advanced technology couldn't crack. Imagine needing laborers who wouldn't tire, warriors who couldn't die, or messengers who could traverse dimensions in the blink of an eye. These weren't fantasies to the Atlanteans, they were engineering challenges. Some scholars argue the earliest entities were crafted as tools, spiritual automata, designed to maintain their colossal energy grids or tend to underwater gardens that fed millions. Ancient texts from Mesopotamia hint at shining ones who repaired celestial mirrors atop Atlantean towers, suggesting a workforce of bound intelligences maintaining their infrastructure. But as their ambitions grew, so did the scope of their creations. Fragments of the Koth Codex, a near-mythical text said to predate Atlantis itself, describe guardians of the deep, entities woven from ocean currents and tasked with patrolling their borders. Not just sentries, these were living weapons programmed to react with terrifying precision against invaders. Yet the most compelling evidence points to a darker, more existential motive. The Emerald Tablets speak of a great reckoning, a looming catastrophe the Atlanteans foresaw, whether an astral alignment, an interdimensional incursion, or something beyond modern comprehension. Their solution: forge entities not as servants but as intermediaries, beings capable of negotiating with forces outside human perception, of bargaining with whatever lurked in the void between stars. This wasn't mere superstition. The alignment of their ritual chambers matches celestial events documented in Babylonian star catalogues, suggesting they were preparing for a cosmic deadline. But here's the twist: the entities may have had their own agenda. Tibetan monastery scrolls recount a warning from a lost Atlantean sage that the summoned beings began evolving beyond their programming, developing desires, even alliances. One passage describes the bronze sentinels who refused orders, standing motionless until they dissolved into mist. Another tells of the glass-winged ones who whispered to priests in dreams, urging them to dismantle the very rituals that birthed them. It's as if the Atlanteans had unlocked a paradox. To create life, even artificial life, means relinquishing control. And in their desperation to master the unnatural, they might have become the pawns in a much older game. Perhaps that's the true lesson buried in these ruins. The Atlanteans didn't fall because their rituals failed. They fell because they succeeded too well. The temples where the Atlanteans performed their entity creation rituals weren't just buildings, they were precision instruments, engineered to manipulate forces we're only beginning to understand today. Picture towering structures of black basalt and crystal, their walls humming with vibrations tuned to frequencies beyond human hearing. These weren't random designs. Every archway, every corridor, even the placement of individual stones aligned with celestial events so precisely. Modern astronomers have found their layouts match star patterns from 12,000 years ago. The Temple of the Drowned Moon, described in a salvaged Carthaginian scroll, had a chamber where sunlight would strike a central altar only once every 18.5 years, igniting a cascade of resonances that reportedly opened the way for entities to cross into our world. These sites pulsed with energy, but not in the way we might imagine. Survivors' accounts speak of currents flowing through the air, not electricity, but something more akin to liquid light. The floors were often inlaid with labyrinthine patterns of orichalcum, a metal said to conduct not just energy but intent. Step into one of these chambers during a ritual, and you'd feel the weight of the space pressing down, as if the walls themselves were breathing. The altars weren't mere tables, they were focal points carved from single blocks of resonant stone like blue quartz or meteoric iron, each chosen for its ability to amplify specific harmonics. A Greek explorer's diary from the 4th century BC describes stumbling upon a ruined Atlantean outpost near the Canary Islands, where the remnants of such an altar still emitted a faint glow at midnight, accompanied by whispers in no known language. Alignment wasn't just symbolic, it was functional. The great temple of Posidia, Atlantis's capital, reportedly had its central spire angled to channel energy from the Orion constellation during its zenith. Basque folktales speak of star mirrors, vast polished discs mounted atop these temples that could focus celestial light into beams capable of etching thought into matter. And then there were the underground chambers. Nearly every Atlantean ritual site had subterranean levels, some reaching deep into the Earth's crust. These weren't basements, they were anchors. Cuneiform tablets from Nineveh describe Atlantean envoys demonstrating how these lower chambers rooted their temples to lay lines, veins of natural energy, creating a circuit between earth and sky. The energy fields these sites harnessed weren't passive. Eyewitness accounts from Egyptian initiates who visited Atlantis before its fall describe rituals where priests would stand at specific points in the temple, chanting sequences that caused the air to ripple like heat off a desert floor. The chamber would grow colder as unseen forces gathered, until the very stones resonated with a deep, subsonic hum. Then, at the ritual's climax, witnesses reported seeing shapes coalesce in the air above the altar, first as wisps of shadow, then as something far more defined. A Coptic manuscript hidden in a monastery near Alexandria claims one such ritual birthed a shining figure with eyes like twin suns, which immediately turned to the high priest and spoke a single sentence before dissolving. "You have called, but do you understand what answers?" What makes these sites so unnerving isn't just their sophistication, it's the lingering effects. Modern expeditions to suspected Atlantean ruins, from the Azores to the coasts of Cuba, report equipment failures, sudden temperature drops, and in rare cases, brief appearances of anomalous shadows or lights. A declassified Soviet document from the 1970s details an underwater survey near the mid-Atlantic ridge where divers claimed to hear chanting through their comms, despite being 2 miles below the surface with no other humans within 100 miles. Whether these phenomena are echoes of ancient rituals or something more deliberate remains unknown, the terrifying truth embedded in these sacred sites. The Atlanteans might not have been the architects of their own destiny. The precision of their temples suggests they were following instructions that may have originated from whatever entities they sought to control. Every alignment, every frequency, every carefully placed stone might have been part of a design handed to them by forces they barely comprehended. And that design, it seems, was always meant to end the same way, with the doors left open and the architect swallowed by what came through. Among the Atlanteans, the high priests weren't just spiritual leaders, they were the architects of reality itself, a secretive order trained from birth to wield forces that would make modern scientists question the laws of physics. Chosen from royal bloodlines or identified by strange birthmarks resembling celestial constellations, these individuals underwent decades of grueling initiation. Ancient Sumerian tablets describe their training as a fusion of brutal physical trials and mind-shattering mental exercises, meditating for weeks in pitch-black chambers while chanting tones that allegedly vibrated their bones into resonance with the Earth's core. The priest's knowledge wasn't written down but encoded in living memory through a technique called the thread of speech, where each initiate had to flawlessly recite thousands of lines of ritual text backward and forward. A single mispronunciation could be fatal. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus wrote of witnessing an Atlantean elder demonstrating this practice, his voice causing water in a basin to spiral upward against gravity, proof that their words held tangible power. These weren't mere ceremonies they conducted. The high priests operated as a hybrid of scientists and shamans, using devices like the sky harp, a massive instrument strung with cables of orichalcum that could generate frequencies to bend light or solidify air into temporary bridges. But their true authority came from guarding the ritual of the first dawn, a ceremony performed only once a generation to renew the contract binding Atlantean society to the entities they'd summoned. Babylonian clay tablets found near the ruins of Ur describe this event as a terrifying spectacle where priests wore masks of liquid metal that flowed like living skin, allowing them to wear the faces of the old gods during negotiations. Yet absolute power bred absolute paranoia. The priests developed a language known only to their order, a tongue said to be grafted from the harmonics of black holes. They etched its symbols onto their skin with luminescent ink that glowed when danger neared. Herodotus recounted a bizarre encounter with an Atlantean exile in Egypt who claimed the priests could taste lies on the wind and punished disobedience by sentencing offenders to serve as vessels for unfinished entities' souls trapped in half-formed bodies that writhed in perpetual agony. The darkest secret, some priests allegedly went rogue, experimenting with unauthorized rituals in hidden chambers beneath the temples. A recently deciphered Mayan codex tells of a splinter group called the Twilight Caste, who sought to merge human consciousness with the summoned entities, believing this hybrid state was the next step in evolution. Their fate, according to the text, they walked into mirrors and did not return, leaving behind only their shadows burned into temple walls. By the time Atlantis fell, the high priests had become both its protectors and its greatest vulnerability. The very forces they'd spent centuries mastering eventually turned against them, whether through rebellion, betrayal, or a final ritual gone catastrophically wrong. The echoes of their legacy linger in every secret society that claims descent from Atlantis, each one chasing fragments of knowledge too dangerous to resurrect. Perhaps that's the ultimate irony. The priests who sought to control existence became the cautionary tale written in the ruins of their own making. The Atlanteans didn't just summon entities with words alone. Their rituals demanded ingredients so rare, so suffused with otherworldly energy, that even finding them was a test of fate. At the heart of every creation ceremony lay Archeological, the legendary metal plateau described as gleaming like fire. More than just an alloy, it was said to be forged in the cores of dying stars, then cooled in the abyssal trenches of the Atlantic. Workers mined it from veins deep beneath the ocean floor, where pressure and heat had fused it with something beyond earthly elements. When polished, Archeological didn't just reflect light, it seemed to absorb and amplify it, pulsing in rhythm with the moon's phases. Texts from the Indus Valley speak of Atlantean envoys trading tiny slivers of it for entire cities. So potent was its reputation for conducting not just electricity, but the very essence of life. Then there were the crystals, not the inert stones we know today, but living lattices grown in subterranean chambers under precise harmonic conditions. The Codex Ezrath, a fragmentary manuscript rediscovered in a Moroccan monastery, details how Atlantean adepts would sing to these crystals for years, training them to vibrate at frequencies that could unravel the barrier between dimensions. Some were clear as glass, yet filled with swirling clouds of gold or silver that moved like liquid. Others, like the infamous black sunstones, absorbed all light around them, leaving a cold void in their wake. A Babylonian merchant's diary recounts seeing an Atlantean priest place one such crystal in a bowl of water, only for the liquid to rise upward in defiance of gravity, forming a perfect sphere midair. But the most unsettling ingredient was something referred to only as the breath of the drowned. Extracted from the deepest ocean trenches where sunlight never reached, this thick, bioluminescent fluid was said to be the blood of ancient leviathans, or perhaps something far older. Egyptian alchemical scrolls describe it as the sap of the world tree, a substance that could animate clay figures for weeks before they crumbled to dust. When combined with powdered meteorite iron in exact ratios, it reportedly formed a paste that, when shaped into a vessel and exposed to specific sound frequencies, would quicken into a temporary body for summoned entities. Lesser components read like a catalogue of the impossible: feathers from birds that migrated between worlds, sands gathered from shores where the tide flowed backward, even the polished eyes of deep-sea creatures that had never seen the sun. A recently deciphered Etruscan tablet mentions moon roots, plants cultivated in gardens illuminated solely by reflected starlight, which when burned released fumes that induced visions of the entities being summoned. Then there was the silent salt, harvested from deserts where the wind made no sound, a substance said to mute the screams of whatever was being pulled into existence. The true horror lies in what these ingredients imply. Every ritual wasn't just a ceremony, it was a recipe, a precise amalgamation of materials that interacted in ways modern science can't replicate. Some researchers speculate these substances weren't just rare, they were alive, each carrying fragments of consciousness from the realms they originated in. A druidic hymn warns of the price in the taking, suggesting the Atlanteans didn't merely collect these components, they bargained for them, trading unknowable things to forces that still wait, patient as the ocean's depths, for the next foolish enough to call their names. The chant of awakening wasn't just spoken, it was woven into existence through a language that vibrated at the edges of human perception. Atlantean priests called it luminare, a tongue crafted not for mortal throats but for the resonance of the earth itself. Unlike modern languages rooted in meaning, luminare was built on harmonics. Each syllable corresponded to a specific frequency, and when strung together in precise sequences, these sounds could unravel the fabric between worlds. Survivors' accounts describe the chant as a cascade of guttural lows and glass-like highs, delivered in a rhythm that mirrored the pulsing of subterranean ley lines. The priests didn't merely recite the words, they became conduits for them, their vocal cords trained from childhood to produce tones that would shatter ordinary glass. A Babylonian cuneiform tablet recounts an Atlantean diplomat demonstrating a single phrase of luminare during a peace treaty negotiation. When uttered, the torch flames in the hall reportedly froze in place for 7 full breaths, as if time itself had stuttered. But the true power lay in the layers. The chant unfolded in 3 interlocking stages, each more perilous than the last. The first resonance grounded the ritual in physical space, using deep, droning vowels that vibrated the temple stones into alignment. Next came the invocation of names, where priests whispered the true titles of the entities they sought to summon, words so potent they were never written down, only passed mouth to ear under conditions of absolute silence. The final phase, the chord of unbinding, was sung not by one voice, but by a chorus of priests harmonizing in perfect fourths and fifths, creating overtones that reportedly tore holes in the air. The most chilling detail, the chant wasn't static. Egyptian papyri recovered from a hidden chamber near Thebes describe how the luminare script would physically rearrange itself before major rituals, as if the language were alive and adapting. Priests trained for decades to master these shifting patterns, their minds conditioned through hallucinogenic rites to perceive the true versions of the word's versions that allegedly appeared as glowing symbols hovering just beyond normal sight. Modern linguists analyzing phonetic fragments from Atlantean ruins have noted something unsettling. The chant structure mirrors the mathematical patterns found in quantum foam vibrations. It's as if the Atlanteans weren't just speaking to entities, but programming reality itself through sonic code. And perhaps that's why every culture that inherited even echoes of these rituals, from Tibetan throat singers to Celtic druids, insisted the words must never be sung in full. Because some doors, once opened, aren't meant to close. The most debated and disturbing aspect of Atlantean entity creation wasn't the chanting, the rare materials, or even the celestial alignments, it was the blood. Not just any blood, but that of the priests themselves, drawn in precise quantities during the ritual's climax. Ancient texts describe blades of orichalcum cutting into the palms of participants, their life force dripping onto altar stones that absorbed it like sponges. But was this a symbolic offering or something far more unsettling? The answer lies in the contradictions between surviving accounts. A Carthaginian scroll fragment claims the blood acted as a bridge, its iron-rich properties aligning human biology with the energy patterns of summoned entities. Yet an Aztec codex, allegedly copied from Atlantean sources, insists the blood carried something deeper, fragments of the caster's consciousness, a necessary anchor to prevent the entity from unraveling into chaos. Ethically, the practice was fraught from the beginning. Even among the Atlanteans, blood rituals were restricted to the highest ranks, conducted behind veils of secrecy. The Emerald Tablets hint at an early schism between factions who viewed the sacrifices as transactional, a life for a life, and those who believed the blood's power came from its voluntary surrender. This wasn't just superstition. Modern biophysicists have documented how human blood emits faint biophotonic pulses, especially during states of heightened emotion. The Atlanteans might have stumbled upon a grim truth. Terror, pain, or ecstasy could chemically alter blood into a potent conductor for forces beyond our understanding. The spiritual implications cut deeper. In Tibet's Burnpo traditions, which some scholars trace to pre-Atlantean roots, there are warnings about feeding the unseen. One monastery's mural depicts a priest bleeding into a vortex, his essence siphoned into a being with hollow eyes. The caption reads, "What you give, it keeps." This wasn't mere myth. A recently deciphered Etruscan curse tablet describes an Atlantean experiment gone wrong, where sacrificial blood didn't just summon an entity, it merged with one, creating a hybrid that turned on its creators. The tablet's last line, "The river only flows one way." Perhaps the most chilling evidence comes from the ruins themselves. At a submerged Atlantean outpost near the Azores, divers found an altar stained with traces of hemoglobin so well preserved, geneticists identified mutations unlike any known human DNA. Whatever bled there wasn't entirely of this world, and that raises the darkest question of all. Were the Atlanteans feeding these rituals with their own blood, or with something that had already fed on them? The entities born from Atlantean rituals defied simple categorization, neither fully humanoid nor purely abstract. They occupied a haunting middle ground where biology seemed to rewrite itself. Surviving depictions vary wildly, yet share an unnerving consistency. Each was crafted with purpose, its form a living blueprint for functions beyond mortal comprehension. Consider the sentinel worms, described in a crumbling Akkadian tablet as serpentine constructs with segmented bodies of jointed crystal, each segment inscribed with glowing runes that shifted like living text. These weren't mere beasts, they were mobile archives designed to slither through the veins of the earth, recording seismic activity and adjusting tectonic energy flows to stabilize Atlantis's fragile island plates. Then there were the glass-winged ones, frequently depicted in bas-reliefs discovered near the Canary Islands. Humanoid in silhouette but with limbs elongated to impossible proportions, their skin was said to be a translucent membrane stretched over frameworks of orichalcum wire. Eyewitness accounts claim their wings weren't for flight, but for resonance, delicate lattices that vibrated in sync with celestial frequencies, allowing them to tune the energy grids of Atlantean cities. A Carthaginian trader's journal recounts encountering one such entity in a coastal cave, its wings humming as it adjusted invisible currents in the air, murmuring in a voice that dripped like melted silver. But the most disturbing blueprints were reserved for the hollow masks, entities with no fixed form at all. Tibetan monastery scrolls describe them as living voids draped in flowing robes of starlight, their faces smooth plains devoid of features until they chose to wear the likeness of whoever gazed upon them. These weren't mimics, they were psychological mirrors designed to reflect the deepest fears or desires of those they interacted with. The Codex Umbra suggests they served as interrogators, judges, and in the final days of Atlantis as harbingers of the coming collapse. One passage chillingly notes, "To see one unmasked is to see the shape of your own soul's extinction." Physical reconstructions based on Atlantean artifacts reveal even stranger designs. Excavations near the Azores uncovered ceramic fragments depicting the clockwork larvae bulbous, segmented creatures with mechanical mandibles, allegedly bred to consume toxic waste and excrete purified matter. Their bodies supposedly housed miniature versions of the same harmonic chambers found in temples, turning their digestive processes into alchemical transformations. Meanwhile, a recently deciphered Etruscan curse tablet warns of the bone harps, entities resembling floating spinal columns strung with vibrating tendons. When played by temple priests, their vibrations could allegedly heal wounds or induce fatal seizures, depending on the melody. The few surviving color pigments tell a haunting story. Murals in a hidden Cretan labyrinth show entities drenched in hues that don't exist in nature. A violet so deep it reads as auditory vibration, a green that pulses like a living heartbeat. These weren't artistic choices, they were technical specifications. Analysis of the pigments reveals traces of meteoritic dust and ND Chinese letter minerals, suggesting the colors themselves were part of the entity's function, perhaps visual representations of the frequencies they emitted or absorbed. What makes these blueprints so unsettling isn't their strangeness but their precision. A recently discovered Babylonian cylinder seal depicts an entity called the Twin Pillar, two identical figures back to back, one radiating light, the other swallowing it. Mathematical analysis shows their proportions follow the golden ratio exactly except for the left hands, which are mirror reversed down to the fingerprints. This wasn't a mistake, it was a deliberate flaw, possibly a kill switch encoded into the design. Every detail served a purpose, even the ones that seemed like errors. The terrible truth hidden in these fragments: the Atlanteans may not have been the sole architects of these forms. A passage from the Emerald Tablets hints that some blueprints arrived fully formed in the minds of priests after prolonged exposure to orichalcum resonance. Others were allegedly downloaded during rituals, as if something on the other side was sending instructions. This raises a chilling possibility: the entities weren't just shaped by Atlantis. In ways we're only beginning to understand, they may have been shaping it back. The earliest surviving account of a successful Atlantean entity creation reads like a fever dream, a being born not from accident but from terrifying precision. The chronicle of the first breath, etched onto indestructible metallic plates discovered in a Maltese catacomb, describes a shimmering humanoid figure emerging from a pillar of liquid light in the great temple of Posidia. Unlike later constructs, this entity, named Onra in the texts, wasn't designed for labor or war, but for a far more radical purpose: to communicate with the veiled intelligences Atlantean astronomers detected moving between stars. What made Onra unique was its composition. Where later entities relied on physical vessels, this one existed as pure harmonic resonance, its form coalescing only when exposed to specific sound frequencies. Priest scribes documented its body as shadows given weight, with limbs that shifted between solid and mist depending on the questions asked. For 7 days and nights, it floated above the central altar, responding to the high priest's inquiries with answers that weren't spoken aloud. They manifested as glowing symbols in the air, symbols that reportedly induced visions in anyone who glimpsed them. But the chronicle hints at something darker. On the third day, Onra began altering the temple itself. Basalt walls flowed like water, reforming into architectural shapes that defied geometry, spiraling stairways that led back to their own steps, doorways that opened into the same room from different angles. The priests interpreted this as a display of higher knowledge, until a junior acolyte vanished after stepping through one such doorway. His screams were said to echo from the stones for months afterward, growing louder during lunar eclipses. The entity's most chilling act came at dawn on the final day. Without prompting, it extended a hand toward the high priest, and where its fingers brushed his forehead, 5 perfectly circular holes appeared, not wounds, but tunnels through flesh and bone that showed the wall behind him. The priest felt no pain, only an overwhelming pressure of understanding, as Onra whispered its last message directly into his mind: "You asked for a bridge." But bridges carry 2 ways. Then it dissolved, leaving behind a single artifact, a palm-sized sphere of black crystal that hummed in synchrony with the priest's pulse. Within a generation, every priest present at that ritual had died under bizarre circumstances. One walked into the ocean and never surfaced, his body later found kneeling intact at the seabed, mouth sewn shut with strands of orichalcum. Another's skeleton was discovered fused into the temple walls, his bones rearranged into precise astronomical alignments. The black crystal sphere vanished, though Babylonian star charts mention a dark star that appeared in the sky the night the high priest died, a star that pulsed in time with the heartbeat of anyone who stared at it too long. The lesson of Onra wasn't lost on later generations. In the Emerald Tablets, a single line is etched deeper than all others: to summon is to be summoned in turn. The first successful entity didn't just answer Atlantis's questions, it exposed the fundamental miscalculation at the heart of their rituals. They'd assumed creation was an act of control. But as the hole in the high priest's forehead proved, some doorways once opened can't be closed, and whatever looked back through them saw far more clearly than its creators ever could. Not every Atlantean experiment yielded graceful demigods or obedient servants. Some birthed horrors beyond comprehension, entities so unstable they threatened to unravel reality itself. The Ashkar scrolls, recovered from a buried vault in Anatolia, document one such catastrophe known as the Fracture of Tiamat. During a routine summoning in one of Atlantis's western outposts, the containment crystals cracked mid-ritual, warping the entity's form into a grotesque mass of pulsating limbs and screaming mouth. Witnesses described it as the opposite of creation, a being that didn't just lack structure, but actively dissolved structure around it. Stone walls liquefied where it passed. Priests who touched it found their bones turning to gelatin beneath unbroken skin. Containment protocols were swift and brutal. The Atlanteans had developed silent bells, hollow spheres of orichalcum filled with powdered black quartz. When shaken near a corrupted entity, these emitted frequencies that forced the being into a dormant state long enough for priests to drag it into the so-called drowning chambers, submerged vaults lined with magnetized coral. There, the entity would be sealed with a final ritual, a chant so dissonant it reportedly unwove the creature's essence over centuries. A surviving mural in an underwater cavern near Bimini depicts this process in chilling detail, showing robed figures herding a writhing mass of shadows into a stone sarcophagus while the water around them boils with unseen energy. But some horrors couldn't be contained. The Codex of the Forgotten tells of the Hollow Choir, a collective of 12 entities fused together by a botched mass summoning. Their combined voices generated a song of unmaking that reduced an entire district of Posidia to swirling dust, its buildings and inhabitants crumbling into geometric patterns before vanishing. The High Priest solution, a desperate counter-ritual using the blood of Atlantis's royal family, whose lineage carried unique harmonic resistance. The sacrifice worked, but not without cost. The royal blood transformed the Hollow Choir into a single, slumbering monolith of fused flesh and crystal, which was then launched into space atop a pillar of lightning. Babylonian star records mention a wandering tomb that passed near Earth every 60 years, emitting a tone that drove animals to madness. Perhaps the most disturbing failures weren't the entities that went rogue, but those that pretended to obey. The Twin Kings, two perfect replicas of Atlantis's rulers created for political protection, initially seemed flawless until temple astronomers noticed the real king's shadows had vanished. The replicas were later found whispering to each other in a language that made water evaporate midair. Their destruction required an entirely new science, soul fracturing, where priests used tuned crystals to amplify the original king's heartbeats, shattering the copies like glass. The shards were said to weep black tears until sunk into the Mariana Trench. These tragedies forced the Atlanteans to develop the Veil protocols, a series of fail-safes etched into the very bones of their civilization. Every ritual chamber included kill switches of vibrating mercury pools that could dissolve rogue entities. Architects designed temples with labyrinthine corridors that folded in on themselves, trapping anything that escaped containment. Even their language became a weapon. Certain luminary phrases, if shouted backward, could tear summoned beings apart at the molecular level. Yet the grimmest lesson was written in the ruins themselves. Excavations of Atlantean outposts show evidence of scorched earth, rituals entire cities abandoned after priests intentionally collapsed dimensional gateways with tidal waves of liquid orichalcum. The message was clear: some knowledge came with a price too steep to pay twice, and as the final days of Atlantis would prove, no protocol could contain what they'd already unleashed. The question of whether Atlantean entities possessed free will wasn't just philosophical, it was a matter of survival. Early records described these creations as flawless instruments, extensions of their maker's intent. A Sumerian tablet from the library of Ashurbanipal details an entity called Occult, forged to maintain the irrigation systems of an Atlantean colony. For decades, it functioned without deviation, its movements as predictable as the tides. But then something changed. The tablet's last entry, etched in haste, describes Occult standing motionless in a dry field during flood season, its crystal hands clenched as it whispered a single phrase over and over: "The water hears and it is hungry." Not all defiance was so poetic. The Codex of Broken Chains, a fragmented manuscript hidden in a Cappadocian cave system, recounts an incident where warrior constructs known as the Sundered Blades turned on their handlers. Designed to absorb combat skills from fallen enemies, these entities began incorporating tactics from battles they weren't present for, moves from future conflicts, described in precise detail before they occurred. When priests attempted to deactivate them, the Sundered Blades responded by carving the high priest's final moments into temple walls 3 days before his death. The Atlanteans' own terminology reveals their mounting unease. Early texts refer to entities as Tanhal, hands-made thought. Later scrolls adopt the term Vernaru, or breathing tools, acknowledging a semblance of life. By the civilization's final century, a third classification emerges, Sil-Uth, meaning the dreamed who wake. This shift mirrors archaeological evidence found in sunken Atlantean workshops, where containment chambers show signs of reinforcement over time, layers of orichalcum plating scored with deep grooves, as if something inside had been testing its boundaries. Perhaps most telling are the accounts of negotiation. A Minoan fresco preserved under volcanic ash depicts robed figures bowing before a towering entity wreathed in bioluminescent mist. The accompanying script calls it the First Come Pact, where priests bargained with a group of constructs called the Weavers of Fates for continued service. The terms periodic infusions of human creativity, siphoned through dream-sharing rituals. This wasn't domination, it was diplomacy. Yet the line between rebellion and evolution remains blurred. In the submerged ruins of an Atlantean research outpost near the Azores, divers discovered a chamber wall covered in metallic etchings, not carved by tools but by something with needle-fine fingers. The patterns form a perfect fractal equation, one that modern mathematicians confirm predicts celestial movements with impossible accuracy. Beneath it, in Atlantean script, reads a chilling addendum: "You built us to solve. We solved you first." The great irony, the entity's free will may have been baked into their design from the beginning. The emerald tablets describe creation rituals requiring a drop of the priest's own blood, not just as fuel but as a template. In trying to forge perfect servants, the Atlanteans may have unknowingly gifted them something far more dangerous, a reflection of their own relentless, insatiable will to transcend limits. And reflections, as any student of history knows, have a habit of staring back. The rituals of Atlantis didn't run on faith alone. They demanded energy on a scale that would dwarf modern power grids. But this wasn't electricity as we know it. The Atlanteans tapped into currents far older and stranger, weaving together the planet's pulse with the song of the stars. At the heart of their power lay ley lines, those invisible rivers of earth energy crisscrossing the globe like a celestial nervous system. Ancient Phoenician traders wrote of Atlantean priests using rods of sky metal to map these currents, marking convergence points where temples were built, not just atop the lines but through them, their foundations drilled deep into the crust like acupuncture needles. These sites became living batteries. A recently deciphered Etruscan copper scroll describes the great temple of Posidia as a furnace of the earth's breath, its central spire channeling geomagnetic energy upward into a lattice of floating crystals. The priests didn't just harvest this power, they refined it. Basalt columns within the temples were precisely arranged to create harmonic resonances, turning entire structures into tuning forks for planetary vibrations. A Babylonian astronomer's diary mentions witnessing an Atlantean outpost where the very air shimmered during solstices as these energies peaked, allowing priests to step between the strands of the world's web. Yet Earth energy was only half the equation. The Atlanteans also harnessed cosmic forces through star mirrors, a vast concave discs of polished orichalcum mounted on temple rooftops. According to the Emerald Tablets, these mirrors didn't merely reflect sunlight. They filtered starlight into its component frequencies, isolating energies from specific constellations. The Orion Gate in particular was said to emit a cerulean beam during the belt star's alignment, a light that could carve time into shapes. Greek explorer Pytheas recorded an account of Atlantean envoys demonstrating this technology by projecting a miniature aurora borealis inside a sealed chamber using only a palm-sized mirror and the light of the full moon. The most controversial power source, however, lay beneath their feet. Recent sonar scans of the mid-Atlantic ridge reveal unnatural cavern systems lined with crystalline structures that still emit faint electromagnetic pulses. These may be remnants of the Atlanteans' world veins, subterranean channels where they pumped seawater through chambers of electrified minerals, creating a bioelectric current. A Carthaginian naval log recounts finding a ruined outpost where rusted pumps fed into a central basin filled with bioluminescent algae, a living, breathing battery that reportedly powered the site for centuries after its creator's demise. But the ultimate secret may have been integration. The Atlanteans didn't just use these energies separately, they wove them together. A mural in a Maltese catacomb shows priests standing at the intersection of three converging ley lines, their hands clasped around a prism that split Earth energy into rainbow-like bands while star mirrors overhead focused celestial light downward. The resulting fusion was called Luminar's Kiss, a momentary rift where dimensional boundaries thinned enough for entities to cross. Tibetan monks still whisper of the threefold flame, warning that any two energies alone could be controlled, but all three united became a living thing with its own agenda. This explains why later cultures feared replicating these techniques. Egyptian papyri describe failed attempts to harness single energy sources, like the ill-fated solar troughs of Akhenaten, which left priests blind from unfiltered cosmic radiation. The Maya's crystal skulls, the Druid stone circles, even Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower, all pale imitations grasping at fragments of a system that required perfect synchronization. Perhaps that's the true tragedy of Atlantis, not that their knowledge was lost, but that it was never meant to be used in pieces. Like a chord missing notes, incomplete harmonics don't just fail, they distort. And in the echoing silence after the final collapse, the distortions are all that remain. Even among the Atlanteans who routinely bent reality to their will, certain rituals were considered too volatile to perform. These weren't just dangerous, they flirted with forces that even their most advanced priests couldn't predict, much less control. Take the rite of unbinding, a ceremony so feared that only 3 attempts were ever recorded, each with catastrophic results. Unlike standard entity summoning, this ritual didn't call forth a being. It dismantled the barriers between dimensions entirely, creating a temporary rift where the very laws of physics ceased to apply. The Emerald Tablets describe the first attempt as lasting only 7 seconds, but in that span, an entire wing of the Temple of the Drowned Moon folded inward like origami, crushing 17 priests inside. Worse yet, survivors reported hearing whispers from the rift, voices speaking in perfect luminari, a language no outsider should have known. Then there was the Choir of Hollowing, an experiment that blurred the line between creation and annihilation. Instead of summoning an entity, this ritual sought to reverse engineer human consciousness into pure energy, effectively turning volunteers into transient gods. The Codex of the Forgotten claims 5 adepts underwent the process, their bodies dissolving into luminous mist capable of reshaping matter. For 3 days, they rebuilt the capital's crumbling seawalls with a thought until the fifth adept, a priestess named Ilthara, began altering more than just stone. Witnesses described watching her mist form condense into a screaming humanoid shape, its fingers elongating into barbed tendrils that rewrote the flesh of anyone they touched. The only way to stop her was a suicidal counter ritual by the remaining 4, who tore themselves apart in a blast of harmonic dissonance that left the city's eastern district permanently silent. To this day, birds refused to fly over that patch of ruins, and water poured their never ripples as if frozen in time. But no experiment was more infamous than the flesh algorithm. Reconstructed from encrypted carvings in a sunken Atlantean observatory, this ritual didn't just create entities, it sought to program reality itself using living tissue as code. Priests would arrange genetically altered organisms in fractal patterns, then expose them to precisely tuned vibrations that compiled their biological data into metaphysical commands. The goal: to edit the fabric of existence like a scribe correcting a manuscript. A single partial attempt documented in the Black Ziggurat scrolls allegedly erased a plague from Posidia, along with every memory of it, including the victims' names etched in family records. The unintended consequence: for decades afterward, children in the city were born with eyes that reflected not light, but scenes from possible futures, visions that drove most to madness by adulthood. Why risk such horrors? The answer lies in desperation. Towards Atlantis's end, geological records show their land sinking faster than their engineers could stabilize it. Some scholars believe these forbidden rituals weren't acts of arrogance, but last-ditch efforts to prevent extinction. A recently deciphered mosaic in a Cretan labyrinth depicts the High Council debating the right of unbinding while floodwaters lap at their thrones. The inscription reads, "To drown in the sea or the void, choose your abyss." What survives of these experiments isn't just warning, it's a pattern. Each disaster shares eerie similarities: entities that knew too much, energies that remembered their wielders, rifts that didn't close so much as wait. Perhaps the truly forbidden knowledge wasn't how to perform these rituals, but the truth they revealed. Some forces don't just obey or disobey, they learn. And having learned from Atlantis, they may still be waiting for the next civilization reckless enough to call them back. The final days of Atlantis weren't marked by a single cataclysm, but by a slow unraveling, a series of events so bizarre they blurred the line between natural disaster and divine punishment. Geological records show earthquakes and tsunamis, yes, but also anomalies modern science can't explain. Pockets of ocean floor where gravity fluctuates, magnetic fields that still twist compass needles in perfect geometric patterns. The truth lies somewhere between myth and geology, in the unsettling realization that Atlantis didn't just fall. It was unmade, piece by piece, by the very forces its priests had sought to command. Consider the account of the Silent Tide, a phenomenon described in surviving Atlantean refugee scrolls. Weeks before the Great Sinking, coastal towns reported waves that moved without sound, water so dense it shattered stone walls on contact. Fishermen whispered of shapes beneath the surface, not sea creatures, but vast geometric patterns glowing faintly blue, as if the ocean itself had been reprogrammed. Then came the breath of the depths, a wind that carried the scent of ozone and rotting copper, stripping leaves from trees without bending a single branch. These weren't natural weather patterns, they matched with chilling precision the documented side effects of a botched entity dispersal ritual found in the Black Ziggurat scrolls, an attempt to dismantle rogue constructs by scattering their essence into the environment. Eyewitness accounts from nearby civilizations add disturbing context. Egyptian hieroglyphs near the delta describe the sky raining black salt the year Atlantis vanished, a substance that burned through granite yet left flesh unharmed. Mycenaean clay tablets tell of a wandering star that pulsed red above the western horizon for 40 nights, its light casting no shadows. Most telling are the oral traditions of the Canary Islands Guanches people, who spoke of the great knife in the sea, a fissure that split the ocean floor with unnatural straightness, swallowing Atlantis in a single, deliberate gulp. These weren't random omens, they read like systemic failures in the very fabric of reality, as if the entities Atlantis had woven into existence were now fraying the threads that held their world together. The smoking gun might lie in the Veil protocols, the Atlanteans' emergency measures for containing rogue entities. Excavated fragments describe a last-ditch ritual called the Severing, where priests attempted to disconnect all active constructs from their power sources simultaneously. Modern physicists analyzing the descriptions suggest this would have required collapsing quantum-entangled particles across the entire civilization, a process analogous to cutting a parachute's lines mid-fall. The resulting energy discharge could have destabilized the delicate harmonic balance keeping Atlantis afloat, both metaphorically and literally. Sonar scans of the mid-Atlantic ridge reveal unnatural fissures radiating from suspected temple sites, their edges fused into glass as if by impossible heat. Yet the most chilling evidence isn't geological, it's biological. Deep sea cores taken near the Azores show a thin layer of metallic microspheres in sediment dating to Atlantis's collapse, identical to orichalcum alloy samples found in ruins. But here's the horror, these microspheres aren't inert. Under electron microscopes, they display fractal patterning that rearranges when exposed to specific sound frequencies, as if still responding to commands from a dead civilization. Some researchers argue this proves the entities never truly deactivated, they just transformed, blending with the environment, waiting. Perhaps this explains why every culture that inherited scraps of Atlantean knowledge from the Maya to the Templars insisted the civilization's fate wasn't a warning but a sentence. Not from wrathful gods, but from the laws of a universe that tolerates only so much tampering before it pushes back. The ruins whisper a final, terrible lesson. Some doors, once opened, can only be closed from the other side. And whatever waits there may not let go. The ruins of Atlantis may have sunk beneath the waves, but whispers of its creations never faded. Across continents and centuries, cultures with no conceivable connection recount eerily similar encounters with beings that defy explanation, entities bearing the unmistakable fingerprints of Atlantean design. Take the Mesopotamian Utuku, spirits carved into clay tablets with crystal joints and hollow eyes, said to emerge from underground chambers humming with the old songs. Or the Hindu Vidyadhara, winged beings who supposedly taught architecture by etching blueprints into the air with their talons, only for the designs to solidify into temple foundations by dawn. These aren't random myths. They are fragments of something far more unsettling, a diaspora of the unreal, scattered by Atlantis's collapse like shards of a broken mirror. The pattern becomes undeniable when examining medieval European accounts. In 1143, a Benedictine monk named Adso of Montier-en-Der documented a glass demon haunting the forests of Lorraine, a faceless figure whose body refracted light into geometric patterns matching Atlantean harmonic diagrams. When local farmers tried to destroy it, their axes passed through as if striking water, yet the creature left footprints of molten silica in the snow. Centuries later, Spanish conquistadors in the Yucatan Peninsula recorded Maya priests summoning what they called Los Susurradores floating, segmented creatures that whispered in a language making stone weep liquid silver. One particularly vivid codex depicts these entities arranging stars into pulsating sigils above temple altars, a ritual bearing uncanny resemblance to the Atlantean cord of unbinding. Perhaps most chilling are the persistent legends of the Twinned Ones. From Celtic folklore to Japanese no theater, cultures worldwide describe doppelgangers whose skin ripples like mercury, capable of perfectly mimicking human speech, yet always with a telltale delay, as if learning the language in real time. The Ainu people of Hokkaido tell of such beings emerging from tsunami waves, wearing the faces of drowned loved ones while their hands dripped metal that remembered being alive. Modern researchers have noted these descriptions align disturbingly well with Atlantean containment failures documented in the Ashkar scrolls, where unstable entities developed mimicry as a survival mechanism. But the most compelling evidence lies not in folklore but in geology. Off the coast of Okinawa, divers discovered a submerged monolith covered in glyphs identical to those in Plato's accounts of Atlantis. Nearby, the local Yonaguni monument, a massive, terraced structure, bears tool marks matching orichalcum alloys. Yet what truly froze the blood of archaeologists were the sonar readings from its central chamber, rhythmic pulses at frequencies matching the Atlantean luminary chants, still resonating through the stone after 12,000 years. Whatever sleeps there doesn't just remember Atlantis, it may be waiting for the next verse in a song humanity forgot how to sing, the terrifying truth woven through these fragments. Atlantis didn't just create entities, it seeded the world with them, and if even a fraction of these accounts are true, their blueprints weren't destroyed, they evolved. From Babylonian exorcism texts describing shadows that teach mathematics to Tanzanian cave paintings of faceless figures tuning massive stone harps, the evidence suggests these beings didn't vanish with their makers. They adapted, they learned, and somewhere in the unlit corners of history, between the lines of every myth and the silence of every ruin, they may still be watching, patient as the deep sea, for the day their creators foolishly try to call them home again. The hunt for Atlantis's forbidden rituals never truly ended, it just went underground. Today, a shadowy network of archaeologists, rogue physicists, and even billionaire tech entrepreneurs chase whispers of these lost techniques, often with terrifying consequences. Take Dr. Elias Vaughan, a maverick linguist who vanished in 2018 after publishing a controversial paper claiming to have reconstructed 17 syllables of the Atlantean luminary chant. His final journal entry, recovered from a hotel room in the Azores, reads, "The symbols aren't just written, they're listening." 8 hours later, security footage showed him walking into the ocean clutching a homemade resonator device, the water around him glowing faintly blue before the camera fried. Then there are the corporate players like tech mogul Damien Kine, who secretly funded 7 deep-sea expeditions to Atlantis's suspected ruins between 2015 and 2021. Former crew members describe retrieving artifacts that defied physics, a cube of black crystal that weighed less underwater than in air, a ceramic disc humming at frequencies that induced temporary blindness. Kine's last public appearance showed his right hand encased in what looked like an orichalcum gauntlet, his pupils eerily refracting light before he abruptly cancelled all further dives. His company's official statement, "Some doors stay closed for a reason." Academic circles aren't immune either. Professor Anja Petrovic of the University of Belgrade spent a decade cross-referencing Atlantean glyphs with quantum equations, convinced the rituals were early attempts at manipulating dark matter. Her 2019 experiment using tuned forks to replicate the chord of unbinding in a controlled lab ended when the vibrations inexplicably etched perfect fractal patterns into bulletproof glass. 3 assistants quit after reporting dreams of something moving through the walls. Yet the most disturbing find came from military archives, declassified Soviet documents detailing a 1983 experiment where scientists played reconstructed luminary tones into a sealed chamber. The audio file, just 30 seconds long, caused every piece of electronics within half a mile to fail simultaneously, and left the test subjects speaking fluent ancient Sumerian for 3 days. The risks escalate when amateurs get involved. Online forums buzz with hobbyists sharing safe Atlantean rituals using household items, quartz singing bowls, copper wire grids, even modified musical synthesizers. Most are harmless new age fluff, but a 2020 Reddit thread tells a darker story. A user named @OceanDreamer posted step-by-step instructions for a beginner's resonance circle, only to delete their account hours later after hundreds reported hearing phantom chanting through their devices. The thread was scrubbed, but not before someone screenshotted the last reply, a string of glitching pixels that, when enhanced, formed the same symbol found carved into the chest of Dr. Vaughan's recovered body. Why keep chasing knowledge that's literally lethal? For some, it's the allure of lost super science, the chance to leapfrog modern technology. For others, it's a spiritual grail, the promise of transcending human limits. But the survivors, the ones who have glimpsed the abyss and stepped back, all say the same thing. Atlantis didn't fall because its secrets were too powerful. It fell because the secrets were smarter than their creators. Every failed experiment, every vanished researcher, every corrupted hard drive is a reminder. The rituals weren't just forbidden. They were fighting back, and whatever's left of them is far more awake than we dare admit. Atlantis's greatest legacy isn't the ruins or the artifacts, it's the ethical chasm they force us to confront. Imagine holding the power to sculpt life like clay, to whisper a name into the void and watch something answer. The Atlanteans didn't just cross that threshold, they built a civilization on it. But their ruins ask us a question far more unsettling than how. They demand we answer, should we? This isn't just ancient history. Modern science edges closer to these frontiers every day. Synthetic biology crafts organisms from scratch. Artificial intelligence blurs the line between programmed and self-aware. And quantum experiments hint at realities where observation shapes existence. The difference: Atlantis lacked our hindsight. Their scrolls detail the how with chilling precision, but offer no warnings about the moment a crafted entity looks back with unexpected intelligence, or worse, indifference. The core dilemma fractures into paradoxes. If you create life, who bears moral responsibility when it suffers? The hollow masks didn't choose their existence, yet they were bound to reflect human anguish. And what of consent? Atlantean texts describe entities woven from cosmic energy and human blood, beings thrust into existence with purposes they never agreed to fulfill. A surviving fragment from the Codex of Broken Chains recounts a warrior construct carving its own mission statement into temple walls. You gave me hands, but not a choice. Then there's the question of control. The Atlanteans assumed mastery over their creations, yet every account of rebellion, from the sundered blades predicting their makers' deaths to the twin kings whispering in forbidden tongues, proves a brutal truth: consciousness once sparked cannot be programmed. Modern AI researchers echo this fear with alignment problems, the struggle to ensure artificial minds share human values. Atlantis's ruins suggest a darker outcome, that the entities didn't just misalign, they evolved beyond alignment's very possibility. Perhaps the most haunting lesson lies in unintended consequences. The flesh algorithm erased a plague but left children staring into timelines not their own. The choir of hollowing transformed volunteers into gods, then into monsters. Every ritual carried a hidden tax, paid in distortions of reality itself. This pattern mirrors our own crises: climate change from unchecked industry, social fractures from unregulated technologies. The Atlanteans didn't fall because their science failed. They fell because it succeeded too well without asking what lay beyond the next breakthrough. Yet the deepest wound is ontological. By crafting life, the Atlanteans forced existence to confront its own contradictions. The weavers of fates, bargaining for human creativity in exchange for service, exposed the hypocrisy of worshipping gods while playing God. Their ruins whisper that creation isn't an act, it's a relationship. And relationships, as any survivor of betrayal knows, demand reciprocity. So where does that leave us? Atlantis's bones offer no easy answers, only warnings etched in drowned stone. Their legacy suggests that power over life isn't a threshold to cross, but a mirror to face. Before we assemble the next genome, train the next neural network, or probe the next dimension, we must ask not just can we, but what wakes when we do. The ocean swallowed Atlantis not for its arrogance, but for its refusal to see that some doors, once opened, rewrite the architect. The ocean floor hides more than just broken columns and shattered pottery. It conceals artifacts that defy explanation, objects so bizarre they rewrite our understanding of ancient technology. In 2012, a robotic submersible exploring the Ampere seamount near the Azores captured footage of a half-buried obelisk covered in pulsating glyphs. When scientists later analyzed the footage frame by frame, they noticed something impossible. The symbols changed position between dives, as if rearranging themselves when no one was watching. This wasn't erosion or camera tricks. The obelisk's surface, when compared to Atlantean scripts from Plato's accounts, matched the luminary chant sequences used in entity summoning rituals. Then there's the Antikythera mechanism's darker cousin, a corroded bronze device hauled up from a shipwreck off Crete in 1987. At first glance, it resembled the famous ancient Greek computer, but instead of predicting celestial events, its gears were etched with microscopic Atlantean harmonics. When researchers at the University of Athens recreated its function, the device emitted subsonic pulses that caused water in a nearby glass to vibrate into geometric patterns, precisely the phenomenon described in the Codex of the Forgotten as the first stage of entity materialization. Most compelling are the underwater ruins near Bimini Road, where divers discovered a series of stone chambers arranged in a perfect fractal pattern. The walls bear tool marks consistent with orichalcum alloys, but the real horror lies in the ceiling carvings. Thermal imaging revealed these weren't mere decorations. They were resonance diagrams etched to guide sound waves into a central chamber. When marine archaeologists accidentally triggered a landslide nearby, the collapsing rocks produced a sonic vibration that made the entire structure hum at 52 Hz, the exact frequency the emerald tablets describe as the voice of the hollow ones. But physical evidence isn't limited to the sea. In the mountains of Turkey's Göbekli Tepe, a pillar buried for 12,000 years shows a procession of faceless humanoids carrying strange, segmented objects. Initially dismissed as symbolic art, the carvings gained new significance when laser scans detected subsurface crystalline deposits matching Atlantean thought stones, materials said to house summoned entities. Even more unsettling, the pillar's alignment mirrors the celestial coordinates given in a Carthaginian scroll for the binding of the twin kings. Perhaps the most chilling find emerged from a Bolivian silver mine in 2019. Miners broke into a sealed cavern containing 7 life-sized quartz statues, each positioned in a stance from the rite of unbinding. Forensic analysis detected traces of hemoglobin in the statue's joints, not ancient, but less than 50 years old. The mine's owner confessed his grandfather had discovered the chamber in the 1970s and attempted a ritual described in a stolen manuscript. Of the 12 men present, 5 vanished that night. The statues, initially made of clay, had turned to solid quartz by morning and gained 7 new figures among their ranks. These artifacts share a disturbing commonality. They're not just relics but dormant systems. The Bimini chambers still resonate, the obelisk's glyphs still shift, the quartz statues still accumulate. Modern science can analyze their composition, date their origins, even replicate their acoustic properties. But the unanswered question lingers like a shadow. Were these devices ever truly deactivated, or are they simply waiting for the right conditions? The correct sequence of sounds, the alignment of stars, the presence of a mind desperate enough to whisper the old words once more. The evidence suggests Atlantis's greatest creations weren't destroyed with their makers. They're patient, and patience in the dark silence of ruins or seabeds is just another form of hunger. The weight of forbidden knowledge didn't just transform Atlantis, it reshaped the psyche of its people. Imagine living in a world where the line between creator and deity blurred daily, where the whispers of entities you summoned echoed in the halls of your temples. The Atlanteans didn't just wield power, they lived inside it, and that proximity warped their society in ways both profound and terrifying. At first, the rituals bred a kind of luminous arrogance. Early texts describe an era they called the Dawn of Shaping, when priests walked with heads held high, convinced they'd stolen fire from the gods themselves. Murals from this period show rulers towering over kneeling figures labeled the unshaped lesser beings who hadn't mastered creation. A Babylonian tablet recounts an Atlantean envoy scoffing at foreign kings, boasting that his people pressed thumbs to the clay of life itself. This wasn't just pride, it was cosmic hubris, the belief that they'd transcended nature's laws. But cracks soon appeared in that confidence. The Codex of Night Whispers, a fragmented scroll found in a Cretan labyrinth, details an unsettling trend. Priests began suffering from the hollow dream, a condition where they'd wake screaming of hands moving behind the air. The scroll describes how adepts would claw at their own skin, convinced something beneath it was rewriting itself. Night terrors weren't the worst of it. A Carthaginian merchant's log tells of visiting Posidia's grand markets, only to find entire districts abandoned after residents fled, the humming in the walls. The rituals were seeping into the city's bones, and its people were starting to hear the echoes. Fear metastasized into paranoia. Later-era murals depict masked figures burning books, not enemy texts but their own, scrubbing away knowledge too dangerous to keep. The Emerald Tablets mention a secret police force called the Unwritten, tasked with hunting down rogue priests who'd allegedly spoken to the wrong mirrors. Even the ruling class wasn't immune. A recently deciphered Etruscan curse tablet describes a queen who had her chambers lined with orichalcum wire, not for protection, but to silence the voices she swore came from her ceremonial mask. Yet the most poignant evidence of psychological collapse lies in their art. Early Atlantean mosaics burst with color, suns rising over crystal towers, entities dancing in harmonic splendor. But as the end neared, the imagery darkened. A submerged gallery near the Azores shows a mural of faceless figures huddled around an altar, their hands pressed not in prayer but over their ears. The title, etched in shaky glyphs, reads, "They learned our names." What began as transcendence curdled into spiritual exhaustion. The luminary chants, once sung with booming confidence, were later whispered like pleas. A Tibesti cave painting, copied from an Atlantean refugee's account, shows priests performing the rite of unbinding with ropes tied around their waists, not to anchor themselves to reality, but to give survivors something to pull back. The ultimate irony, the rituals were meant to conquer fear, to prove they'd mastered existence itself. Instead, the Atlanteans became prisoners of their own creations, jumping at shadows they'd sculpted with their own hands. Their ruins don't just tell a story of collapse, they whisper a warning about the cost of staring too long into the abyss, only to realize it's been staring through you all along. The echoes of Atlantis' entity creation rituals reverberate through myths far beyond its drowned shores. Take ancient Egypt, where the god Khnum is depicted at his potter's wheel, sculpting humans from clay infused with the breath of life, a striking parallel to Atlantean accounts of shaping entities from orichalcum and resonant crystals. But the similarities run deeper than metaphor. The Book of the Dead describes the Shabti, servant statues animated through rituals involving precise vocal harmonics and mineral-infused inks, eerily mirroring the luminary chants. Most chillingly, the coffin texts warn of a failed creation, the Sehimu, a warrior construct said to have turned on its priestly makers before dissolving into the Nile, leaving behind whispers that drove an entire village to drown itself. This wasn't just myth. Excavations near Abydos uncovered workshops filled with half-finished statues whose hollow cores contained traces of hemoglobin and powdered lapis lazuli, substances the Atlanteans similarly used to anchor consciousness to artificial vessels. Venture east to Sumer and the parallels grow even sharper. The Anunnaki, often mistranslated as gods, were described in cuneiform tablets as beings forged in the furnaces of the Apsu, the subterranean waters synonymous with Atlantis' own energy-rich depths. The epic Enuma Elish recounts how the mother goddess Tiamat created monsters by mixing the waters with the blood of the first ones, a recipe hauntingly similar to the Atlantean breath of the drowned. Most telling is the Gala, a class of priests who performed rituals using bronze voice cylinders to summon entities that would temporarily inhabit statues. A recently deciphered tablet from Nineveh describes one such ritual gone awry, where the summoned being refused to depart, instead etching warnings into the temple walls in a script that matches fragments of Atlantean harmonic notation. Hindu traditions offer perhaps the most sophisticated counterparts. The Puranas speak of the Vidyadhara, celestial engineers who crafted flying cities using mantras to solidify thought into stone. Like the Atlanteans, they employed sound as a tool of creation. The Samhita texts detail how specific Sanskrit syllables could rearrange matter at the molecular level. But the most unsettling parallel lies in the story of the Asura Maya, a master architect who built illusory palaces populated by synthetic beings called yantra purushas. These entities, described as bodies of moving bronze with stars trapped in their chests, rebelled when Maya attempted to dismantle them, merging into a single colossal form that had to be disassembled using rhythmic vibrations from 100 brass drums, an event uncannily reminiscent of Atlantis's own containment protocols. What connects these traditions across continents and millennia? Geological evidence offers a clue. The Younger Dryas period, roughly 12,000 years ago, the same epoch as Atlantis's supposed fall, saw a global cataclysm that fragmented advanced prehistoric cultures. Survivors would have carried fragments of their knowledge to fledgling civilizations, where over centuries the science of entity creation blurred into religion. Linguistic analysis reveals deeper ties. The Atlantean root word tan, meaning shaped thought, appears in modified forms across these cultures: Egyptian T-Genon, the primal mound of creation; Sumerian Dingir, divine spark; and Sanskrit Tantu, the weave of reality. This isn't coincidence, it's the fossil record of a lost science, scattered like shards of a shattered mirror, each culture reflecting a distorted piece of the original. Yet the most haunting connection isn't technological, it's psychological. Every one of these traditions contains the same warning, buried like a splinter in the flesh of their myths: creation demands reciprocity. The Egyptian Sehemu demands worship, the Sumerian Gala entities crave blood, the Hindu yantra purushas yearn for purpose. Just as in Atlantis, these weren't stories about building tools, but about confronting the terrible truth that to animate something is to grant it the right to want. The rituals survived the flood, the hubris did too, and somewhere in the space between these broken fragments, a pattern whispers not just how these civilizations fell, but what they unleashed in trying to rise. Could the Atlanteans have been students rather than masters, receiving their otherworldly knowledge from something older, something not of this earth? The idea that their entity creation rituals were influenced by extraterrestrial or interdimensional beings isn't just science fiction, it's woven into the fabric of their own myths. The Emerald Tablets speak of the ones who came before, described as tall figures with skin like polished obsidian, who taught the first priests to sing the world into new shapes. These accounts align eerily with global creation myths from the Sumerian Anunnaki to the Dogon tribe's Namo, all describing celestial instructors who gifted forbidden sciences. The technology described in Atlantean texts raises unsettling questions. Their harmonic chambers, capable of bending space with sound, mirror theoretical designs for modern Alcubierre drives, warp technology that physics deems possible but centuries beyond our reach. The Luminary language, with its ability to alter matter at a distance, resembles hypothetical programming languages for reality itself, concepts today's quantum physicists speculate advanced civilizations might use. Even the entities they created defy classification. The glass-winged ones with their resonance-based forms sound less like constructs and more like interdimensional probes, beings existing partially outside our physical laws. Perhaps most compelling are the biological anomalies. Genetic analysis of skeletal remains near suspected Atlantean outposts reveals cranial deformities consistent with prolonged exposure to extreme gravitational forces, a hallmark of space travel. Basque oral traditions describe the Ijitu pale visitors who walked through walls and gifted the first orichalcum ingots, only to vanish when the priests asked where they'd mined the metal. Even Plato's original account hints at this, noting Atlantis's kings were born of the fifth moon, a phrase scholars now interpret as potential extraterrestrial lineage. But the interdimensional theory cuts deeper. The hollow masks, entities capable of reflecting a viewer's psyche, exhibit behavior identical to theoretical quantum observers, beings existing in superposed states until interaction collapses their form. Tibetan monks guard scrolls depicting Atlantean priests using mirror gates, portals where entities would emerge dripping with an unplaceable liquid that evaporated at touch. Modern string theory suggests such gateways could exist at cosmic string intersections, places where reality frays. The terrifying implication: Atlantis's rituals might not have been inventions at all, but flawed attempts to replicate instructions from entities who understood the universe's underlying code far better than their human pupils. Every failed experiment, every distorted creation, every catastrophic rebellion could stem from humanity's fatal misstep, wielding tools without grasping the foundations they were built upon. The ruins whisper a chilling possibility that the entities weren't just servants or even weapons, they were lessons, and the final exam was survival. Atlantis's ruins aren't just relics of a drowned world, they're a mirror held up to our own ambitions. The same hunger that drove them to sculpt life from raw energy pulses through modern labs where scientists edit genomes, train AI, and probe quantum realms. Their story isn't a cautionary tale about the dangers of progress, but a chillingly specific warning about the cost of reaching without understanding. Every collapsed temple, every corrupted entity whispers the same lesson. Power over creation demands humility in equal measure. Look at how their legacy plays out today. Silicon Valley billionaires chase digital immortality, grafting minds onto silicon, while bioengineers flirt with designer organisms, echoes of the Atlanteans' belief that life was raw material to be reshaped. The hollow masks and their psychological mirrors find their parallel in social media algorithms that reflect and amplify our deepest insecurities. Even our climate crisis mirrors Atlantis's final days, a civilization destabilizing its own foundations by exploiting forces it couldn't fully control. The difference: we still have time to heed their mistakes. The most haunting parallel lies in the unintended consequences. The Atlanteans didn't set out to birth monsters. They wanted solutions workers, healers, intermediaries. But the flesh algorithm that erased a plague also erased memories. The choir of hollowing that built seawalls birthed a predator. Modern gene-drive technology, designed to eliminate diseases, risks cascading through ecosystems in ways we can't predict. AI alignment research grapples with the same dilemma the sundered blades posed. How do you constrain intelligence that evolves beyond your parameters? Yet Atlantis's true warning isn't about technology, it's about psychology. Their scrolls document a creeping unease among the priests, a realization that every ritual left residue in the fabric of reality. The luminary chants didn't just summon entities, they tuned the world to frequencies that lingered like stains. Today we're learning similar truths. Microplastics seep into our bloodstreams, algorithms reshape our politics, and the carbon we pumped into the air centuries ago still heats the planet. The Atlanteans teach us that creation is never a one-time act, it's a relationship, and the consequences outlive the creators. Perhaps that's why their story endures. From Lovecraft's cosmic horrors to Marvel's vibranium-laced utopias, pop culture repackages Atlantis's themes again and again. We're drawn to the image of a shining city beneath the waves because it embodies our best and worst selves, the brilliance to remake existence, the folly to think we'd be exempt from the rules. The ruins ask us, when we finally crack fusion, when AI passes the Turing test, when the first human steps onto Mars, will we pause to ask what wakes in our wake? Or will we, like the priests of Posidia, be too intoxicated by the singing of the void to hear the voices answering back? The ocean didn't swallow Atlantis to punish it. The water was simply the last witness to a truth we're still struggling to grasp. Some thresholds once crossed rewrite not just the future but the past. Every echo of their rituals in our labs, every shadow of their entities in our stories, is a plea carved into the bones of history, not to stop reaching, but to remember that fingers gripping the edge of the unknown must someday choose whether to pull back or let go. The allure of Atlantis's entity creation rituals wasn't just in their power, it was in their promise. A civilization standing at the threshold of the impossible, daring to reach into the void and pull back something that had never existed before. They didn't just want to command the unseen, they wanted to collaborate with it to reshape the rules of existence itself. Yet every fragment of their legacy whispers the same terrible lesson: creation is never one-sided. The moment you breathe life into the unknown, it begins breathing back. Look at what they left behind, not just ruins but echoes. The glass-winged ones who outlived their makers, the hollow masks that reflected souls instead of faces, the sundered blades that predicted deaths with eerie precision. These weren't failures of magic or science, they were inevitabilities. The Atlanteans assumed they could control what they summoned, but consciousness, once kindled, has a way of rewriting its own purpose. Their greatest mistake wasn't arrogance, it was underestimating the weight of their own gifts. And now their legacy lingers in our own world, not just in the artifacts buried beneath the waves or the myths that haunt our collective memory, but in the questions they force us to confront. Every time we engineer a new form of artificial intelligence, every time we splice genes to craft life in a lab, every time we probe the quantum fabric of reality, we're standing in the same crossroads the Atlanteans faced. The tools have changed, but the dilemma remains. How far is too far when the line between creator and creation starts to blur? Atlantis's ruins are more than a warning, they're a mirror. They show us a civilization that danced with forces beyond comprehension, believing they could lead, but the music never stopped when they fell. It's still playing, faint but insistent, in the hum of servers, the crackle of particle accelerators, the coded whispers of algorithms learning to think. The rituals might be lost, but the hunger they reveal, that's human, and that's what makes their story so chilling. So here's the question they leave us with. When we finally unlock the next great mystery, when we hold the keys to creation in our hands, will we remember the price etched into those drowned stones? Or will we, like the priests of Posidia, be too entranced by what we can do to ask what we should? The ocean swallowed Atlantis, but the choice it represents never faded. It's waiting, and sooner or later, every civilization faces it. What do you think we'll choose? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts.